As news broke of a federal judge abruptly killing the CDC's mask mandate for planes and other transit systems, it was like watching the same show I saw last year at this time. In May of 2021, mask mandates fell all over the state of Montana, and while it was certainly appreciated and long overdue news, and of course it was great to see almost all the masks disappear overnight, I was actually really annoyed that they did. And I wasn't annoyed because the masks were gone, of course. I was annoyed why they were gone. If you went to the grocery store on May 13th, almost everybody inside was wearing a mask. But if you went to the grocery store the next day, May 14th, almost nobody was. So what does that tell us? Well, it says that almost everybody didn't want to wear the mask, that almost everybody believed that the mask was of no personal use to them, but they wore it anyway because some perceived authority figure told them to. And they didn't remove the mask because of their own judgments. They only removed the mask when that authority figure gave them permission to. And we might think that's nitpicking, some abstract non-issue. Who cares? It's just a mask. Why should we worry about the principles of wearing it or not wearing it? Well, because it raises an important question. What are the limitations to what we'd all do if directed to by an authority? How far would you go in violating your own conscience and judgment to comply with instructions given to you? Because I'm convinced if Fauci had told us all to walk around with our thumbs up our asses, not only would far more of us have done it than we'd expect, but plenty would go further still and demand the same sort of state coercion to enforce the auto-probing on everybody else. Because after all, my thumb up my ass only works if your thumb is up yours too, so long as it was all deemed scientific, of course. The point is, we haven't done well as a society in thinking about how to handle conflict between an authority figure's orders and our own conscience. What are the principles that guide how to make that judgment and which should win when you have to pick one? It is crucial to think through that ahead of time, because while the consequences of the just following orders mentality may be relatively minor in this mask context, the long-term consequences of the just following orders mentality do catch up with us eventually, historically speaking. That strange combination of simultaneous relief and annoyance is exactly what I re-experienced on Monday. News abruptly broke that a federal judge in Florida has struck down the mask mandate for planes, trains, buses, and other public transit, and immediately videos started going viral showing passengers cheering the announcement.
Masks now optional for employees, customers, following the White House,
No longer enforce the federal mandate requiring masks in all U.S. airports and on-board aircraft.
If you'd like to continue wearing your mask, please feel free to do so. That'll be the first time in 2 years.
And sure, I'd be doing the exact same thing. I'd be happy, I'd be cheering, and I understand that for flight attendants and other airline staff, that decision about upholding your conscience versus complying with orders that you disagree with is heavily influenced by a paycheck that's part of that equation. But it wasn't just passengers and airline staff doing the cheering. The cheering was also happening in the corporate offices, or at least we can assume so, given that every major airline dropped their mask requirements immediately. Delta, American, United, Southwest, Alaska, JetBlue, and more. It is over. And again, what does that tell us? It tells us that even the airline company leadership knew this was nonsense and opposed it, but still went along with it anyway just because the CDC said so. And we knew that already because leadership at several of these airlines already wrote a strongly worded letter asking Biden and company not to extend this nonsense a few weeks ago, but Biden and company did it anyway, and the airlines complied anyway because the strongly worded letter didn't correspond with a strongly earned and strongly flexed middle finger, even though everybody involved, from the CEO's desk all the way down to the guy eating his pretzels as slowly as possible to keep his mask down, they all knew it was nonsense, but they all complied anyway. And I'd ask why, but we know why, at least generally. It's only because a perceived authority figure said so. But even that is a paradox. The only reason we're taking the masks off now is because a new perceived authority figure said so. And we've all just decided that this new authority figure's authority is somehow more authoritative than the last one. Though, in fairness, the authority figure that is this judge is acting more in accordance with her actual constitutional role than just CDC decree. And to that effect, there's an important, blunt, recurring word used in this judge's analysis. Unlawful. The mask mandate was unlawful for several reasons, according to the judge. Unlawful because the CDC exceeded its statutory authority by unrecognizably stretching the law that supposedly justified this rule in the same way they did with the eviction moratorium and other nonsense. Unlawful because the CDC did not follow rules set by the Administrative Procedure Act, which requires a public notice and comment period. And unlawful because the rule was arbitrary and capricious, because it didn't stand up to basic standards of reason. Why require masks if you don't require hand washing and other methods shown to reduce the spread? And why have an eating and drinking exemption so broad that it renders the whole thing void? On what rational basis does a Diet Coke stop the spread? Anyway, I'm less interested in the technicals of this decision and more in the broad takeaway. If this mask mandate was illegal on Monday, that means it was and has been illegal for the entirety of the 14 months that it's been in effect, since just weeks after Biden's inauguration. In any other context, when people who act unlawfully get caught, we don't cheer. We say, get that guy, put him in jail, and put him on trial. But for some reason in this context, we just say, oh, yay, that's great. And we clap a little bit, and we just move on. We have been conditioned against accountability in this context. A victim of crime doesn't cheer just because the criminal stops committing crime. A victim of crime cheers when that criminal gets locked up. And no matter what premise we cite for why we obey these people, none of them hold up. We might say, well, they hold the legal authority. Per this judge's decision, they don't, at least in the way they handled this. You want to make new law? Run for Congress. There's nothing in the Constitution that says you can put on a lab coat and do it from the CDC. Maybe we accept the premise that these people know more about the topic than we do, that their expertise entitles them to rule over us. It doesn't, and they don't have it anyway. If the science behind this policy was so simple, then they could explain it simply. But even their communicator-in-chief can't do that.
Why is it that we can sit here in the White House briefing room with no masks, but people can't sit in an airplane cabin with no masks?
Well, Peter, I'm not a doctor. You're not a doctor. That I'm aware of. If you're a doctor, I wasn't aware of that until today. Right. Okay, not a doctor. Just making sure.
So get a doctor up there to explain it then. But he'll have trouble too, though, because he'll have to cite data that don't exist. No degree supplants the evidence or the lack thereof. Part of the judge's reasoning on the illegality of the CDC's order is that it was not sufficiently explained. Indeed, there's effectively no data to show that airplanes have ever been a major source of transmission. Mask, no difference, because the air filtration and flow on airplanes makes them actually safer than almost any other environment you share with other people. A government study finds that even seated right next to an infected person, transmission is a very low probability on an airplane. An MIT analysis found that the likelihood of contracting coronavirus on a plane was something between 1 in 4 to 6,000. That is an almost never event, and certainly lower risk than other activities in which we engage daily, like grocery shopping or eating at a restaurant. This according to a Harvard analysis. And maybe you say, yeah, well, that's because of the masking. No. One, we have worn masks at restaurants and grocery stores too. Masking is not a variable in this comparison. It's a constant. Two, masking is not the primary factor that these researchers cite. It is airflow and filtration in the plane cabin. And three, show the conditions otherwise. To claim that plane transmission is a huge problem, you actually have to show some plane transmission. They don't because they can't. You can find isolated examples here and there, individual anecdotal claims, but no comprehensive data to show that airplanes are a concentrated place of transmission to justify this sort of unique intervention. In fact, in November 2020, nearly a year into the viral spread, Canada's chief public health officer was asked directly to provide some examples, and she said, quote, "There have been very few reports, extremely rare reports actually, of transmission aboard aircraft. Very, very little. She couldn't even cite one specific example. To my knowledge, and to the best of my searching ability, Rochelle Walensky at the CDC has given us the same data and evidence. Zero. She just hasn't given us the courtesy of that explicit acknowledgement. So they have no legal authority. They have no expert, scientific, or factual authority. Perhaps we rationalize our compliance with these people by considering their supposed practical authority, that they'll punish us. Look, I know it's nonsense, and I don't want to do it, but if I don't comply, they'll punish me. But it's only when we think that individually and shut up and don't talk to each other that it's true. Imagine if instead of writing that letter, the airlines all joined together and told Biden to stuff it. What's he going to do? Ground every major commercial flight in the country? Good luck. See how that works out politically. Even smaller scale, imagine if just one plane load of passengers collectively refused to wear masks. Is the airline really going to hold up their entire crew, especially if their entire crew agrees with the passengers? These people only have the power that we give them, and we have forgotten that, not just as a practical reality that there are more of us than them and they simply don't have the army to control us, but as a moral matter too. The legitimacy of the politicians' authority over us does not come from the law, at least originally. It does not come from science. It does not come from the size of their gun. It comes only from our consent to it. That is the philosophical basis on which this country is founded. Governments derive their just powers from the consent of the governed. That is the language of the Declaration. Without that consent, noncompliance and mockery is the kindest treatment the ruling class deserves. Jefferson prescribed some gardening therapy as appropriate. To cheer them giving back what is rightfully ours is to cheer the inversion of that critical premise. We don't cheer when a robber gives us back our property. We say that guy needs to rot in prison. And I'm not trying to look for discouragement in what is a welcome story. It's just that our points of encouragement demonstrate that the reconditioning of all of our premises and assumptions and most basic values formed from the most basic truths has been largely successful. We're still celebrating according to the premises that made all of this possible. So we can clap for the end of this episode, but what happens if Biden and company appeal this decision and bring it back on the same bogus grounds next week, which was under consideration as of Monday? Now reports say the White House is giving up, which means what? It means the mandate was illegal. They won't fight the finding that it was illegal, and there will be no accountability for that illegality. We'll just move on. And actually, as I edit this video, other reports are now saying Biden will appeal the decision, so who the hell knows? But more to the point, with a broader hypothetical, what happens when the same premises are used to seize the same illegitimate authority next time? Have we really learned our lesson, or will we clap and cheer the end of this injustice only to jump right back in and participate in it again the next time they tell us to? I'll stop being such a buzzkill about celebrating the moment as long as we think critically about why we are celebrating. If it's because we're now free from what everybody knew was nonsense, then why did almost everybody sacrifice the freedom to prioritize the nonsense? If we've learned that freedom is worth celebrating, let's try sticking with that premise permanently. Thanks as always for listening and for supporting this channel. Always appreciate that thoughtful discussion down below, and especially over on Gab, that is at ML Christiansen. You're always welcome to coming out and chat in my live streams. Those are linked down in the description. Looking forward to it. Goodbye.